Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Limited video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with the RX 580, specifically a variant of the card known as the 2048 SP. As the name may imply, there is something special about this card. Well, by special I mean it's nerfed. We see the same number of stream processors as found in the RX 570. The primary difference here is that the clock speeds are slightly higher than RX 570. Now, from what we can tell, this, by the way, was originally discovered by AnandTech, and it is actually available on AMD's own website. They list it, so it is officially recognized. It's not some rumor. It appears to be limited to the Chinese market for now. Now, whether this is going to be the case in the long term or not, we just don't know. So let's go through the specifications of the card. The boost clock has been reduced from 1340 down to just 1284. It's still a little bit higher than what the 570 manages, but the number of stream processors has been cut from 2304 down to just 2048. And the other big deal, of course, is that the memory bandwidth is also going to be diminished. We see the memory clock speed reduced from 8 Gbps down to just 7 Gbps, which obviously will make a difference. Fortunately, because there are fewer stream processors, in theory at least, you won't be too memory bandwidth constrained. So what does all of this mean? Well, at least in theory, this card will be cheaper. I don't necessarily have an issue with the card existing, although I do somewhat question why they don't just have a slightly different variant of the RX 570. They could just have an RX 570 known as the RX 575, RX 571, whatever, and just slightly increase the clock speed. The issue is I don't necessarily see this card being a super seller, particularly if the 12nm process is actually a thing. It's possible, of course, that that's one of the reasons AMD are releasing this GPU in preparation for the 12nm refresh, and they simply want to get rid of parts that they feel are capable of slightly higher clock speeds than, let's say, the RX 570 is able to, but they don't meet the yields, they don't have the number of compute units that would be, working, that would make the 580. It's a bit of a confusing time, but unfortunately, this is just one of those things that GPU manufacturers do as the products get closer to the stack. And if you were to also think about AMD in their past history, as well as Nvidia, they have also released several questionable cards. Once again, I would prefer that they called this card something else, the RX 575, but at least they do make it rather clear that it is the RX 580 2048 SP. Also, a small update concerning Ryzen, and the Ryzen series of processors will actually receive a price cut. This isn't totally unexpected. After all, Intel are readying a whole slew of 9th generation processors, so the best thing that AMD can do is, of course, to cut the prices of their Pinnacle Ridge lineup. How much does depend upon the particular SKU, but you're looking at around a 5 to 10% cut across the board, which isn't shabby. If you were on the fence about buying one of these CPUs, it actually makes a more compelling argument. That means that processors like the 2700X, while they certainly can't compete with like the 9900K, they can compete in terms of pricing. So for those who want to pick up an 8-core 16-thread processor, but don't want to plonk down the amount of money that Intel are asking, this could be a very workable solution. The Ryzen 7 2700X goes from $330 down to just $295. This is compared to the launch MSRP. The 2700 vanilla goes down to $265 US. The 2600X goes down to just $210 US compared to $230, and so on and so on. So once again, a small saving. It's not that big of a deal, but if you are looking to purchase one of these CPUs, it basically becomes a little more tempting. And combined with the fact that all of these CPUs are overclockable, and with the motherboards all supporting overclocking, like the B450, for example, you could pick up a B350, assuming you manage to update the BIOS, and those boards are pretty darn cheap as well. It makes a really good base for a system that doesn't break the bank. And now I want to discuss some of the performance numbers for the RTX 2070. I've had numerous people asking my opinions of whether these cards are any good or not. Amy did do a roundup of a review that leaked a little early, a day or two ago, but there are now a lot more reviews online. And what are my thoughts on this? Well, the best way of describing the RTX 2070 remains the same as when I covered a whole bunch of leaks regarding performance a while ago. So what's my opinion thus far of the RTX 2070? Well, judging from the results that have popped up for the RTX 2070, so what are my opinions thus far on the RTX 2070? Well, it mostly is going to appeal to those who are going to purchase a GTX 1080. Yes, it is more expensive without any question, but the argument, of course, is it's a newer architecture, so performance could improve over time, as well as DLSS. I'm going to get into some performance numbers actually of DLSS in just a moment, along with ray tracing. Ray tracing is completely unproven. We've not really seen it yet in games, at least enough to even warrant discussion on performance. We have heard a myriad of different things. It's going to be playable at 1440p at 60 FPS. Some developers are saying that 4K is going to be achievable without too much of an issue. Others are saying 1080p at 60 FPS is probably what they're going to be targeting. And these, by the way, were the RTX 2080 Ti. So it's very difficult to know. So all we can discuss right now, at least in the merit of this card, is standard rasterization performance. And it does pretty well. It is more expensive than the GTX 1080. It depends how much you're able to get the 1080 for. We're referring to new prices here, although eBay is awash with cheap cards right now. So it's certainly possible that you could get a good deal, although obviously that does mean you're going used. So if we were to look at the performance results then of the GTX 1080 versus the RTX 2070, we'll start out with some AnandTech results. The first one being Far Cry 5. So the 2070 achieves 85, 88 frames per second, depending on whether it's the Founders Edition or not. Compare that, meanwhile, to the 1080, which achieves 81 frames per second, so a small increase there. This is once again at 1440p. Shadow of War seems very similar performance results, 81 frames a second for the RTX 2070 non-Founders Edition. The Founders Edition, which obviously has a slight overclock, gets 85 frames a second. The 1080, meanwhile, hits 70 frames a second. You'll also notice that the RX Vega hangs in rather nicely and basically achieves the same level of performance for these games as the 1080 Founders Edition. Switching now to hardware mechanics and The Witcher 3. Once again, we're going to be looking at 1440p, which I think is the sweet spot for these GPUs. If you're looking at the average frames per second, 80 frames per second, with the RTX 2070 and EVGA XC model, but 70 frames a second for the 1080, which is also an EVGA SC model as well. Finally, Wolfenstein the New Colossus using the Vulkan API, once again 1440p, average results. The 2070 achieves 130 FPS, rounding it up, or 122 if it's the Asus model, and this compares very favorably to 112 FPS of the 1080 EVGA SC model. So there we go then. The RTX 2070 is a really nice card if you were considering picking up a new GTX 1080. If you have that amount of cash and you believe that DLSS could be something that you want to play around with, if you think that ray tracing could be of some interest, or you also want to have the newer architecture, then without any question, I think that the Turing card is the better option. I think that the RTX 2070 is a better buy than a GTX 1080 if you can't get the 1080 at a decent discount, which you can in some instances. The problem is, of course, 1080s are becoming rarer, and prices over the next several weeks will probably start to go up as the cards become formally end of line and Nvidia start phasing them out. But for right now, the 1080 is still a very solid card. So which one would you go for? Well, it really depends on whether you think that the additional features are something that you're interested in or not. Speaking of which, Nvidia have also released a slide to tell us the performance of DLSS with the RTX 2070, 2080, 2080 Ti against a slew of Pascal cards. According to Nvidia, this is with the 4K rendering instead of the usual 4K rendering plus TAAA. According to Nvidia, they were showcasing this with a 7900X, 16 gigabytes of memory. The driver revision was 416.25, and of course Windows 10 64. And it was tested one of two ways. One with DLSS, or the second was 4K rendering native with TAA, temporal anti-aliasing. The results are pretty impressive, you have to admit. With the 2080 Ti, you're getting 68 frames a second with the regular 2080, 60 frames a second, and with the 2070, well, 51 frames a second, which is considerably higher. All of those results do positively destroy the Pascal lineup. So we have the Titan XP with TAA on 44 frames per second, which in this instance does of course mean that the 2070 does distance itself rather comfortably with the Titan XP. And once again, the 2080 Ti demolishes the 1080 Ti. 68 frames per second versus 41 frames a second. That's great, and without any question, it's very impressive, and it does, to me, illustrate that DLSS is probably the more exciting technology for now. I do think ray tracing is going to be cool in the future, but I think it's going to take longer for developers to really start leveraging it. And this is a theory because, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in 6 months or a year from now. But I have a feeling that ray tracing is going to continue to evolve, and possibly the next generation of consoles may support it, which might kickstart the performance and so on. So I do think that as drivers mature, as architectures improve, ray tracing is going to be one of those features which is more heavily used. But in the short term, at least, it's going to be one of those cool features that looks really pretty, but a lot of users may simply not choose to, well, enable it. But with DLSS, I think it's going to be more the gift that gives you instant gratification. The problem is, developers still need to opt to support it, which, well, is down to the developer. It's not to say that Nvidia are charging an arm and a leg for this. They use their own computers to optimize the title, and then of course artificial intelligence on the, using the tensor cores, then the AI of the GPU does its thing, and you know, we all know how that works, so it's not really worth going over again. But it still requires the developers to use it. The other issue I have with these results is that Nvidia are not actually putting out the results with Infiltrator demo with DLSS disabled for Turing. So how does it stack up? So for example, okay, if we once again look at the results, 51 frames a second for the RTX 2070 with DLSS on. So how does that compare against, let's say, the 1080 with DLSS off? I think that those results would have been nice to have seen, but obviously Nvidia, I'll let you speculate on the reason, are just not putting that in yet. So once again, this is, I keep saying this, but it's just one of those features we have to wait for, and it does make purchasing Turing that bit more of a head scratcher. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. It's been a little less organised than what I normally like to do when I'm recording back at my own place. And yes, I am back actually at home now. I am back from the USA. My flight, I left Seattle on Sunday at 1:45 p.m. I arrived in the UK at 7 a.m. on Monday. So you can imagine how jet lagged I was. I slept intermittently yesterday and slept fairly well actually last night. So now I'm spending a lot of today just kind of resting up and getting used to it. My body is still telling me that it's not the time it is currently, so that's making life interesting. But I do suspect it's going to be a day or so before I get back to normality. But once I do, then, you know, I can get back to a more regular filming schedule. So, you know, thanks very much for sticking around. With all of that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff. If you have, like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.